So, having grown up in a Catholic family, went to Catholic school, Catholic parish, this was, when you think of the Trinity, this was the typical image that would be presented of the most holy Trinity. And of course, it's all symbolic. Does this really describe what God looks like? No, not one iota, right? But it does symbolically describe, there's so many symbols at work in this image here. But we know that our Catholic culture is replete with images of the Trinity as symbol. And this would be a very, very typical one. And, we ponder in this mystery how we worship one God, but, Jesus spoke of his Father, and then he spoke of the Spirit, the Paraclete that he would send. So he often spoke in terms of two other people. And so we ponder this mystery to the day. As I said, in the Council of Nicaea, they came up with that formulation that we'll say one God, but three persons in one God. Now, this is as I said, there are theologians that can't completely describe, because no human being can completely describe the nature of God. We can kind of grope at it in the fog. But describing the nature of God is not just left to theologians, right? Academics. The experience of the Trinity also belongs equally to poets and hymnists. We're singing about the Trinity as well today. So artists and storytellers own the Trinity as well. The Trinity belongs to all of us because it describes God's magnificent love for us. Right? So we're in our series called Groundbreaking, and this is week 3 of the message series. And this month we've been celebrating some really, truly say that 10 times fast. Groundbreaking church events, right? So we had Ascension and Pentecost, and now today's Feast of the Trinity, and next week we'll celebrate Corpus Christi. But focusing on today, what we celebrate today in the Trinity is not only a doctrinal mystery, but also a relationship to which we are all invited. So I invite you to break ground with me today as we celebrate the Trinity as one God in 3 persons. A God who is in relationship with God's self. And we know that we are made in the image of God. And so God having a nature of relationship means that we are, by our very nature, relational beings. We are relational people. So let's talk about, how this experience of the Trinity is part of daily life. Now, speaking of relationships, the pandemic gave us the opportunity to really think about our relationships. And, amid all of the pandemic's hardships, many good things, emerged from the difficult situation. For instance, many people recommitted themselves to deepening their relationships, family relationships, friends, so forth. So, along that theme, there's a story of a dad, who took his son out for a day of fishing. They had been cooped up in the apartment for several months with COVID, and once restrictions were relaxed a little, going out, dad and son, fishing sounded like a great thing to do. And, they sitting on a pier, they happened to catch a few fish and collecting them in a bucket of water. So at the end of the day, they're getting ready, packing up and ready to go home with their bucket of fish, and the boy accidentally kicks the bucket into the water. And all of the fish that they had been fishing for all day are free again, right, in the water. Well, the boy just breaks down in tears, like just completely, beside himself. All of their work of the day to catch these little fish is gone. And as the tears are pouring down his face, his father scoops him up, gives him a big hug, and says, don't worry, don't be upset. It's not about the fish. It's about fishing, right? It's about the relationship we form in the things we do together in loving ways. So that's the message of the Holy Trinity. That's the message of the Holy Trinity. The faith we profess says that there are three persons in one God, a relationship. And that means we, as those made in the image of God, are called to be in relationship. Our faith tells us that our God is in relationship with us, and one of the ways we experience, the primary way we experience our relationship with God is through the quality of our relationships with one another. It's a relationship of love and mercy. The unconditional love of that Father in the story of fishing speaks to us of God's unconditional love for us. And God's love is also expressed in mercy, because we have free will and we can make stupid mistakes. We can sin. And when we seek forgiveness, God offers abundant mercy so that we may be healed in our relationship with God and with one another. And Jesus is God's greatest expression of love in the person of Jesus. And this love isn't forced upon us. It is freely given, and we're invited into it. So imagine this love being freely given to you now, as it is at every moment. And as we go about our week, we can ask ourselves a question. Is there anything in my life that's stopping me from receiving the unconditional love of God? Is it some story I've told myself about my unworthiness or something along those lines? So to his disciples, we are also instruments of God's love to others. Just as that dad was an instrument of love to his son, as disciples, we imitate Jesus and the love of God that comes to us through Jesus in sharing God's love with others. As disciples, we imitate Jesus, and we're responsible for it. And that's what we call the Great Commission. And that's what we heard in the gospel today. We heard our Great Commission in the gospel from Matthew today. And it's called the Great Commission because as disciples, this is basically our job description right here in a nutshell. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always until the end of the age. So experiencing a loving relationship with God and inviting others into the same relationship is the great command of Jesus, the great commission of Jesus. And doing that can be quite joyful. It can also be challenging, wonderful and challenging at the same time. Wonderful because experiencing the love of God is a treasure. Challenging because we don't always know how to share that love of God with others, right? Especially people outside our families. But I think just like the mystery of the Trinity, we can think of it in complicated ways and very simple ways. In terms of inviting others into that relationship, that Trinitarian relationship, we can get very complicated and start thinking about programs for evangelization and this and that. And other times it's just as simple as asking somebody, hey, have you thought about going to church? Would you like to go to church with me? I mean, that's what happened to me for 10 years, from age 17 to 27. I did not step foot inside a church until a neighbor invited me. And it was a community like this, very vibrant parish community, and I was hooked. So be not afraid. People are starving for meaningful relationships. The Center for Disease Control tells us we have an epidemic of loneliness. There are people who are waiting to ask. So don't make it so complicated. Do what Frank did with me, my neighbor. Just invite somebody. This commission that we've all been given by Jesus is not intended to be a burden, but rather a joy and a privilege to be disciples who share the good news. And if a person says to him or herself, how can I do this? I'm too nervous to invite others to church. Well, remember that one line when Jesus promises, I will be with you always. Right? What's the worst a person can say? No. Secondly, think of that dad and his son. The way we invite others to know God is through the quality of our relationships with others. It's not about the fish. It's about fishing. So last Sunday, the parish held a groundbreaking ceremony for the new Pius Cafe. And the gathering space is going to be a place for us to strengthen our relationship as a community. Right? We experience the relationship of God through the relationships in a faith community. That's why we're here. This is community. We must commit to using that new space to invite others to experience our faith community as well. So in this Eucharist, I'm going to be praying that God will give us a renewed sense of a God who is in relationship, a God who is one God in three persons, a relational God who's in relationship with us. We ask for the wisdom to know how to invite others into that same loving relationship.